Tonight is time for us to conduct Section 5 review of the financial sector. Here are the modules that are going to be covered on the tests on Thursday and Friday. Remember, Thursday's multiple choice and Friday is going to be free response. We'll cover Module 23, Definition and Measurement of Money, 24, the Time Value of Money, 25, Banking and Money Creation, 27, Federal Reserve Monetary Policy. Notice 26 is not in there. The Federal Reserve history, the advice I've been given is that history of the Federal Reserve is just not something that's going to be tested on the AP exam. Interesting to know about, but again, not testable, so I am not going to focus on it tonight. Then Module 28, the money market, and Module 29, the market for loanable funds. Let's get right into it. First thing I thought I'd start with this time for this review is just a list of the key terms that you need to know. You need to understand these terms, know what they mean, be able to define them, be able to pick them out of a list of definitions, and also understand how they work. One other note here at the bottom, and I hope I didn't make the type too small on this. Down here, this Section 5 review, which is on page 288 to 290 of the Krugman book, is a really good set of definitions and concept overviews that should help you in your preparation for the test and in just making sure you understand all these concepts. Okay, let's start with Module 24, the time value of money. And you'll notice I'm skipping here Module 23 because there are only a few things in Module 23 that I think are really important. And those are covered in up here when we talk about money, checkable bank deposits, what the money supply is, and fiat money. Those are really the things that are going to be important for you to know from Module 23. And you can ask me more questions tomorrow on that if necessary. Module 24, on the other hand, I don't know how to make that little squiggly line go away. We're not going to worry about it. Module 24, the time value of money. Here are the things that are important. First of all, present value and future value, knowing what each of these means, and then also understanding the definition. So knowing those definitions there, and then just knowing the formulas. Future value is present value times 1 plus r. Present value is future value over 1 plus r to the t. Now you could add a t up here in future value as well to that equation if you're asked to do something over multiple years. Need to know how to calculate present value, net present value, and future value. Remember that net present value is nothing more than a present value calculation with any current costs taken out of it. Also, know how to use the calculations to decide whether certain decisions make sense. So we did a couple of these in class, and you need to know how to do them. So for example, if you're offered $1,000 today in return for $1,100 2 years from now, would you take the offer? Well, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, what's the interest rate? But you need to know how to go through a word problem like that. Module 25, Banking and Money Creation. First and most important in Module 25, you need to understand the idea of a T account. Understand that assets are on the left, liabilities on the right. Assets are what I own, liabilities are what I owe. And in the case of a bank's T accounts, which is what we're showing here, loans and cash reserves are on the asset side. Deposits, otherwise known as demand deposits, are on the right-hand side. Also need to know how banks create money, and you need to be able to use a T account to demonstrate the process. So the example we used in class and is on the Module 25 slides is where I believe it was Lucy had $5,000 and she put it in the bank, and then the bank made a loan, and maybe it was to Mitch, and then Hannah took that money and put it to her bank. You need to understand how the bank goes through the process of creating money out of that initial deposit. Module 27, the Federal Reserve and Monetary Policy. First of all, you need to know how the Fed uses the tools at its disposal. And those tools, again, remember, are reserve requirements, the discount rate, and open market operations. Understand what each of those are and what it does and when the Fed would most likely use one of these. Remember that the one that is most often used is open market operations. Also need to understand the Fed's T account, so assets and liabilities for the Federal Reserve, again, versus a bank. So government debt on the asset side, monetary base on the liability side. You also need to understand open market operations in more detail. So what does it look like when the Fed makes an open market purchase of $100 million? How does it affect the Fed's assets? How does it affect the Fed's liabilities? And then how does it affect the assets and liabilities of commercial banks? I would put here, just you could even take commercial out and just put banks in here. What are the inflows and outflows that are involved in an open market purchase? Also, what are the inflows and outflows associated with an open market sale? Module 28, the money market. Need to understand the opportunity cost of holding money, and recall the opportunity cost of holding money is the cost of what I could have done with that money held in other instruments. The example we used was, instead of holding cash, I could put the money in a certificate of deposit. The certificate of deposit would earn 3%. The opportunity cost would then be whatever that 3% translated to in terms of dollars earned when I was holding money instead. Need to understand the money demand curve. Also, and the factors that cause it to shift. So what makes, what causes a rise in money demand? What causes a decline in money demand? And understand what those shifts look like. Need to understand the money supply curve and equilibrium interest rates. Remember why the money supply curve is vertical. Remember that we are talking about money supply chosen by the Fed. And then understand what happens when we're in an environment where interest rates go above that equilibrium or below that equilibrium. What is likely to happen in the market as a result? Module 29, the market for loanable funds. Need to understand the savings investment identity. This is the one item for Module 22 that's going to be important for you to understand, mostly because it is carried forward into Module 29 and helps reinforce this idea that in the economy, the market will seek equilibrium between the demand for loanable funds and the supply of loanable funds. Speaking of which, you need to understand the demand for loanable funds. You need to understand the curve. You need to understand why, as the real interest rate falls, which is over here, more projects become profitable, so the quantity of loanable funds demanded increases. You need to understand the supply of loanable funds and why the supply of loanable funds is an upward sloping curve, and why, as the real interest rate increases, the quantity of loanable funds will increase. Need to understand, of course, the factors that shift demand and supply of loanable funds. And continuing on 29, need to understand equilibrium in the loanable funds market. So what happens in each of these quadrants? That's the way I presented it in the module. Would have been, 2 nights ago. What happens if you're operating in this quadrant, this one, or this one? And we can talk about that more tomorrow if we need to. Need to understand inflation and interest rates, understand what the real interest rate is, and recall its nominal interest rate minus the expected inflation rate. Understand expectations of future inflation, including the Fisher effect. And also be able to articulate the difference between short-run and long-run interest rate determinations. Remembering the difference between short-run interest rate determination here, remember, driven principally by the money supply, and long-run interest rate determination driven principally by the loanable funds model of the interest rate. Need to understand, and I know this is a little small, but this is intended more as a guide to get you back to those pieces of each of the module videos that are important. Understand how these shifts happen. Understand the steps. Understand how these are related. Understand why the interest rates move in unison. And then within the long run, the same thing. Understand what is driving shifts in the demand for money. Understand how changes in demand for money can move the supply of money curve, the supply of loanable funds curve to the right, and then move it back to the left. This is one I think that we'll probably cover in more detail tomorrow, simply because I wasn't here today to go over this particular module, the second half of module 29, and it's pretty important for us to understand. Also need to understand, just in general, the loanable funds market versus the money market, how they're different, why the graphs are different, understand the factors that cause the shifts in the demand and supply curves for both the money market and the loanable funds market. And then remember to understand the different players in each. So savers and investors versus the Federal Reserve. Module 29, the first half, has, I think, 2 really important slides that showed you who the players are in each and the factors are that change each of those curves. And tomorrow we can spend some more time, too, on not just being able to list those factors that shift the curves, but also understand why those factors shift the curves as we're preparing for Thursday and for Friday. Okay, that is it for tonight. Sorry if we went a little bit over, but I wanted to make sure you had this overview to get you started. We'll spend all class tomorrow reviewing, and as usual, I'll have extended office hours tomorrow if people need it. And I will also be available before the test on Thursday, after the test on Thursday, and before the test on Friday. That's it. Have a great night, and I will talk to you tomorrow.